Belfast is a city synonymous with the Troubles, but whilst known for the physical barriers that divide communities, it became apparent that the peace walls are just the manifestation of less visible socio-economic divides, especially those related to deprivation, access to food, and essential public services within the city. Exploring the divides within the city of Sheffield allowed us to explore a more nuanced look at the divisions in the Northern Irish capital. Peace walls stretch 21 miles, and whilst constructed to separate communities and keep the peace, they have prolonged a state of anxiety and tension. What has resulted is 14 of 20 of the most deprived areas being located directly next to an interface, their history causing a lack of investment, mass vacancies, and high unemployment. The area surrounding the Shankill Peace Wall is a prime example of how proximity correlates with heightened levels of food deprivation, mental illness, and alcohol abuse. Unstable governance has only exacerbated these problems, heavily reducing public spending towards these areas. The peace walls were erected as a short-term retroactive solution, attempting to solve complex grievances. It became clear that many of the social issues mentioned previously are tackled in a similar after-the-fact approach. Whilst a necessary component of a solution, food banks, rehabilitation centres, etc., aim to relieve the symptoms of the divided city after the fact, rather than tackling the societal challenges that cause them. This project therefore engages with a more long-term proactive strategy to work alongside traditional support methods, targeting funding at deeper societal challenges, providing improved opportunities in education, employment, and quality of environment. Urban planning has focused on turning communities' backs on one another, creating a labyrinth of cul-de-sacs, fenced parks, and no man's lands that remain vacant. In Shankill, we see the impact of these design decisions. This no man's land has an incredibly low density with a high vacancy rate. 60,000 square metres of land is wasted along this stretch of wall alone. Lying at points as little as half a metre below the pavement, running almost poetically along the line of the peace wall, the Farset River helped establish these communities before being culverted in the 1800s. In its heyday, it supported the creation of industry, energy production, and a more integrated community, with shared investment and local trade before production was removed to the edgelands. A River in Sheffield further explored this gap between production and consumption, raising questions about the ownership of manufacturing in our modern consumerist society. Whisky production was one of the most prosperous industries, with over 160 distilleries in its prime. Illegally distilled poaching, a homebrewed variant, became an act of activism. Outlawed by the British for tax reasons, the act of production became political, and allowed many the ability to become economically independent. This project therefore begins to speculate. What would happen if in 2025, aligned with the proposed removal of the peace walls, Belfast Council initiated the Farset project, using the long-buried river, retaining it and the land either side to the people living in some of the most deprived communities in the capital? A more proactive approach, addressing the symptoms of division, both socially and economically empowering the residents. The aim, to prototype and test the use of commonly owned productive land, and question its role in combating the symptoms of the post-conflict divided city, and to help dissolve formal and informal barriers within communities. Brexit and coronavirus make it a key moment for the city to propose new strategies relating to trade, production, and renewal. The river will enable a productive commons, community-owned and managed land, first using vacant sites that neighbour peace walls. Northern Ireland's green space target was used for scale, and production is to include the growing of crops and construction materials, utilising rewilding to provide new parkland, woodland, and wetland. A distributed network will link the divided communities together, the various processes providing jobs for a range of skill sets and the ability to invest money back into these communities. Here are some explorative collages, the river creating a more productive permeable barrier, and the reintegration of both industry and nature back into the proximity of communities. The heart of the commons will lie around the Shankill interface. Potatoes, plums, and other regional crops are produced. An unconventional mixing of functions, a main commons building is to become the central point of governance, combining spaces for commons management with a market to bridge the gap between production and consumption, and a distillery producing poaching, making use of the locally sourced produce. The commons becomes an independent zone where production is legalised. The project is initiated in 2025. Vacant sites are reclaimed near to the wall, and the rewilding begins. Cupar Way is reclaimed, the first element of the wall is removed, enabling the community to begin consultation and establish the community land trust that will manage the commons. Beginning with light touch reclaiming of the abandoned plots, the commons will spread from the wall, a series of productive pavilions being deployed as the area is restructured. The river is revealed supporting this new production, densification around the peripheries to support the few who were displaced. Whilst often controversial, the incredibly low density of the area and its dysfunctional nature make densification a viable strategy supported by future planning guides and reports, targeting 60 to 70 units a hectare. With much of the wall still in place, it is used for growing, a meanwhile project to be replicated across the city. The community established a manifesto for their architectural approach, emphasising locality. Reuse is favoured, making use of the resources of the abandoned homes, and repair is recognised for its benefits to education and local employment. The material palette therefore uses not only locally produced timber, but rammed earth from the groundworks of the common land. Routes and phasing were developed through the layering of both historic routes that traverse the site and the line of the river. In 2028, demolition begins on some of the vacant properties nearest to the wall, enabling the rewilding spread and production to begin. The first of a number of productive follies is constructed in the remnants of one of the homes. Its purpose is to collect, prepare, and store the material reclaimed from the homes, to be used in the construction of the Commons building and the surrounding area. Space is provided for the testing of a site-specific mix of rammed earth, which is to be used across the Commons. The demolished housing and land displaced for landscaping is catalogued and used within the Commons. The Commons continues to grow, spreading from these vacant sites, creating the new parkland. The landscape holds not only the Commons building, but a range of follies supporting productive activities. An overlapping of natural and logistical straight paths, dispersed elements all link back to the centre. Here are a number of studies showing the created ecotones that will foster biodiverse but also dynamic conditions across the site. As mentioned, high-quality housing for the few residents whose homes were removed will be constructed on vacant sites that now sit on the peripheries of the Commons, with views out across the parkland. As always, the rolling hills of the Black Mountain and Divots serve as a backdrop overseeing the restructuring. A number of pavilions are constructed, including the Groundskeeper's Pavilion, a botanical garden, not only serving to facilitate the distillery of fruits for flavouring, but creating moments of discovery and excitement within the Commons. Likewise, floating aquaponics gardens floating on the lake, created in the centre, experiment with new growing techniques, but also engage with the community through play in the summer months. All pavilions have been designed as a simple kit of parts to be assembled by the community. A feature in the wetland, the Thatcher's Pavilion provides resources for workers to collect reeds and engage in the long-standing tradition of thatch production. The platform extends out towards the water, and the structure doubles as a hide, presenting opportunity to observe birds, beavers, and other animals that create their home within the parkland. A pavilion for harnessing the power of the Farset is also constructed, adjacent to the new Commons building, and is used to power productive activity. Making a feature of the process, it begins to highlight the sustainable agenda of the initiative. The Commons building sits central, connecting back via straight paths to the rest of the Commons. Inspired by the layout of the Masters, this organisation works around the central courtyard, where the market will tie production together. Storage and the arrival of goods is positioned out onto the parklands, presenting it as a key space part of the process. The form was developed through the breaking down of a rigid external rammed wall, responding to the immediate landscape. Multiple means of approach respond to its shared ownership, and allows the landscape to reclaim the central space over time. Treating the rammed earth exterior almost as if an existing structure, materiality breaks down into softer timber facing the courtyard. This all revolves around the rotunda, a central space where the community can come together to oversee the Commons. The only circular element in plan, the rammed earth walls breaking down. The space looks through to an enclosed garden greenhouse that acts to connect elements of the building, but also makes use of some of the heat expelled from the distillation below ground. Shown here, the greenhouse produces the few ingredients such as grapes and oranges that can't be grown as well locally. This is an example of the many cases where the line between leisure and production are blurred, intentionally to promote engagement and education. Industrial elements were initially sunken, using the ground to control heat. Tall elements in timber and thatch rise above the rammed earth perimeter wall, revealing the previously illegal processes. The landscape was brought up either side. The rotunda's form, referenced in the traditional oast house, enables passive ventilation. The drying process occurs below the rotunda, and its form pulls the heat up, heating public spaces. The building opens up to the right-hand side towards the water. Air can be drawn through. It's here we see the open workshops, another key space which plays off Belfast's upstart culture and provides essential spaces for a number of craft people to work in the Commons. Their craft is displayed in the courtyard, where we also see residents with produce of the Commons. It is here we see the permeable broken brick floor that manages water, capturing it for distillation and plant maintenance, but also allowing the landscape to infiltrate the central spaces. Through the layering of the landscape, I wanted the building to respond to the passing of time, with the landscape that hides it morphing daily, monthly, and seasonally. In the summer months, parts of storage and workshop are opened up, allowing the landscape to trap back into the centre. A worn line in the grass, people congregate and discuss in the harvest. Inside the store, the light filters into the space, filling throughout the year with glimpses through to the small kitchen, where small amounts of food can be prepared for markets and community events. Being sunken, the building begins to relate back to the earth that is to sustain the community. As visitors venture down into Cooper's Hall, home to the whisky stores, Cooper's work producing new barrels, using the iconic arched barrel vaulted arches and scaling them to span the space. With the parkland context, the building uses its basement in the winter months to store the excess water when the stores are not active. The space doubles as a cavernous pool for the community, heated by that which is expelled from the other industrial processes. A totem of rammed earth containing spoiler, created from remnants of the divided city, brings light down into the space. Studies show some of the elements of spoiler to be embedded around the building, archiving fabric from the city. This serves as a sensitive way to reflect on some of the area's more recent history. Concrete lintels adding texture to internal walls, roof tiles being used in rammed earth to create a horizontal rhythm, and a window from a derelict factory building preserved within the fabric of the rammed earth. Grating within the courtyard is used over the barrel vaults, which filters light coming down into space, so as not to spoil the alcohol and reference a number of Celtic patterns. Stepping back some of the land around the edges brings light down into some of the other process spaces, such as the germination space seen here. This creates moments of connection between the industry and the earth, and continues to bring indirect daylighting into some of these more controlled process spaces. In a number of places, industrial referencing has been used to recalibrate perceptions of industry, presenting a new, more compatible production. This is seen in the water towers constructed from timber, creating a trellis, referencing the chimney that once sat on the site. From the massing, we can also see the sawtooth roofs of the open workshop and the fermentation space, which continue to reference industrial form. We see the Commons building sat on its site at the splitting of the river, surrounded by formal and informal landscaping, a market being held in the central courtyard. Timber frames extend beyond the rammed earth, defining walkways and paths, a move that has been made to further create this connection to the earth, the building beginning to prepare a work in progress or excavation site. As is tradition in Northern Ireland, the bar occupies a corner condition, opening up to the water, a place for the community to come together and to look out over the river and the common land. Arches are referenced, but this time in a softer timber, and a light well allows the landscape to continue to infiltrate the building. After the Friday meeting, the members of the community retired to the bar, served an Irish coffee made from the poggine retrieved from the basement. This image shows the in-between. As the homes are being disassembled, residents start to make use of the material. The landscape and the community reclaiming the land and growing beginning. In the distance, the rolling hills continue to serve as a consistent backdrop to the commons. A line of bricks embedded in the earth remembers the line of the peace wall, a subtle feature in the landscape, a nod to the site's history. Whilst a hypothetical scenario, a testing of concept, I believe the productive commons to present a case for a more radical ground-up strategy for the divided city. Communities and residents have proven themselves to be passionate, skilled, and often desperate for change. This project aims to use this, using employment and empowerment to help redivert their energy from violence and conflict to more positive, productive, and communal means, helping promote a more peaceful future for the city. Thank you.